What did the Lord of the Rings look like from Gollum's perspective? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover the best in fantasy books and TV shows. The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, The Witcher, and much more. If you like the sound of that, there's a subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen. We should probably start looking at Gollum's perspective on all this by reminding ourselves about what kind of creature he was when we meet him, because it will become important later on. We all know that he was once Smeagol, a hobbit-like creature, who after taking the ring forcibly from his cousin Deagol, ran off to hide in the caves under the Misty Mountains. When Bilbo encounters him, he has been there half a millennium. That's a long time, just preying on goblins and fish and being corrupted by the ring. The ring stretched his lifespan and tortured his mind, but still there were some vestiges of his old self there. In particular, his insistence that the ring was not only his precious, but also his birthday present. Clearly some part of his brain didn't want to accept what he had done, murdering his own cousin for the ring, and what he had become. But the only reason he was even still alive, and the primary driver for all he did, was still the ring. This dichotomy of personality will be very important later on. Bilbo obviously stumbles across the ring during The Hobbit and takes it from Gollum, and Gollum reacts as you would expect, chasing after Bilbo, alternately hurling abuse at him or threatening to kill him and trying to trick him, anything to get the ring back. But Bilbo escapes. At which point, the story we know moves away from Gollum, but we'll stay with him. Obviously, Gollum couldn't help but try to get the ring back, but he had been in the dark for so long, and the ring had been affecting him for so long, that the sunlight burned him, and even the moon was too bright. That kept him under the Misty Mountains for a while, otherwise he would surely have just run straight after Bilbo. Anyway, eventually the pull of the ring was too great. Gollum had to find it, so after 2 years he set out after Bilbo. And at this point, he is very much Gollum. The Smeagol part of his personality was firmly hidden. Venturing outside with fresh air, food and exercise may have helped him a little, but the absence of the ring made even the dark now horrible for him. And it was a forlorn task. After 2 years, Bilbo's trail was definitely cold. However, the outcome of the quest for Erebor was, of course, a matter of huge gossip in that part of the world. Smaug killed, the dwarves returned to the Lonely Mountain, the huge battle, all that gold, and a hobbit by the name of Baggins. By sneaking around and eavesdropping on conversations, Gollum managed to trace Bilbo's path through Mirkwood to the Lonely Mountain, and then back. If you remember, at the end of the story, Bilbo returned back the way he came, with Gandalf and quite a lot of money. Incidentally, sometime around now is when Gollum learned that Bilbo was from the Shire, though he didn't know where that was. Presumably he overheard someone say that was where Bilbo returned home to. When he was heading back through Mirkwood, still trying to trace Bilbo, he seems to get a bit less sneaky and a bit more careless, breaking into houses and so on, and the elves tell Gandalf the rumours of a blood-drinking ghost. Gandalf starts to investigate, but then gets distracted. Sauron has formally declared himself in Mordor. And Gollum disappears once more, this time for around 30 years, heading south down the Anduin Valley, it would appear. We next hear of him just outside Mordor. What seems to have happened is that when Sauron declared himself, he started to pull the forces of evil to rally around him. The ring shared an essence with Sauron, so when Sauron re-emerged from the shadows, Gollum was drawn that way instead, south, not west. The irony here, of course, is that if Sauron hadn't declared himself, Gollum would probably have kept up his pace westwards and eventually reached the Shire itself and found Baggins and the ring unprotected. But no, Gollum heads south slowly, enters Mordor, and gets captured by Sauron's forces. He is interrogated and tortured, seemingly by Sauron himself, giving up the only 2 bits of useful information he has about the whereabouts of the ring: Baggins and Shire. At which point, Sauron releases him and gives instructions that he be allowed to roam free. Sauron here presumably understands the ring's hold over Gollum, and that when set free he will continue to hunt for it, so calculates that it gives him another way to find the ring. He wouldn't have any problems getting it back off Gollum afterwards. Gollum seemingly doesn't think about the reasons for his release much at all. But around this time, probably before and after the torture, he strikes up a kind of working relationship with Shelob. She doesn't eat him. He probably wouldn't be very tasty anyway, and he brings her fresh meat, orcs mostly. Again, this will obviously be important later. Because not far outside Mordor, by the Dead Marshes in fact, Gollum is captured again, this time by Aragorn. Gandalf and Aragorn had been hunting for Gollum for a few years by then. Gandalf was starting to piece together how the One Ring might have ended up with Bilbo, and Gollum was the missing piece in the jigsaw, so Gandalf questioned Gollum. Now, as we're looking at this from Gollum's perspective, we have to see that all this must feel like him against the world. Aragorn and Gandalf weren't Sauron, but still, they weren't soft on him. Aragorn bound him and gagged him and force-marched him hundreds of miles, and Gandalf admits that he had to be harsh when extracting information from him, even threatening him with fire at one point. They left Gollum the prisoner of Thranduil, Legolas's father. At the risk of feeling pity for Gollum, this must feel pretty miserable to him, robbed of the thing most precious to him, as he saw it, feeling its absence all the time, captured by Sauron, and now haunted by the memory of what happened to him there, captured and interrogated by Gandalf and Aragorn, kept a prisoner, so not even able to hunt for the one thing that he once needs the most. The whole world was against him, and he could trust no one. However, at this point, he does manage to escape, with a little help from an orc raid, no doubt coordinated by Sauron, to get Gollum back in play again. He escapes Mirkwood and heads back under the Misty Mountains, this time to Moria, partly to escape his captors and partly to keep up the search for the ring himself. He tried to go all the way through Moria and out the West Gate, but couldn't get it open, so just lay low for a while. At which point, the Fellowship open the West Gate from the outside and make their way through past Gollum. Was this a coincidence? Gollum being able to sense the One Ring approaching, or one of those Tolkienian moments of fate? Probably a bit of all three. At which point, it's probably worth pointing out that Gollum will have recognised at least 3 members of the Fellowship. Aragorn had captured him the previous year, Gandalf interrogated him, and Legolas was the prince of the realm he was kept prisoner in. When you add in Boromir and Gimli, who both looked pretty tough, it was clear that Gollum wouldn't be able to take the ring from Frodo then, so he opted to just follow the party. Frodo catches sight of him several times, as surely do some of the others, although Gollum never approaches and they never actively try to capture him. Why? Well, this is when that great quote from Gandalf comes in, saying to Frodo that, "I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it. And he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least." We don't know how Gollum managed to follow them across the bridge of Khazad-dûm, but he picks up their trail on the far side of Lothlorien, as the depleted Fellowship head down the river. Still lurking and watching, but still not making his move. When he does make his move is when those tough-looking bodyguards for Frodo have gone. Frodo and Sam have headed off on their own towards Mordor, and so Gollum attacks them. Thankfully, the hobbits prevail. They could have killed him, but Frodo's pity won out, as Bilbo's had years earlier. Frodo ties some elven rope around Gollum's ankle and Gollum freaks out. It's not just about being tied, it's rope from Lothlorien, so is hallowed in a way, and Gollum, overtaken by the ring as he is, cannot bear it. So Frodo releases him and makes him swear on the ring itself to help them and not to harm them. This is a crucial moment for Gollum as a character, because it brings out his Smeagol side that had been buried centuries before. Frodo puts his trust in Gollum, shows him mercy. Incidentally, this can be put in clear contrast to Aragorn, one of the indisputably good characters in the story, who captures Gollum, then binds him in rope and drags him to the elves for cross-questioning. But Frodo releases Gollum and puts his life in Gollum's hands. And Gollum, Smeagol, responds to kindness with kindness. He's still Gollum, so not a pleasant person to be around, but he did undoubtedly keep the two hobbits alive as they travelled through the dead marshes, stopping them going through the Black Gate when it would have been suicide for them, telling them of the other way into Mordor, and so on. There are layers to this, of course. Part of Gollum's motivations here are to prevent the ring from going to Sauron, who Gollum feared above all else, but every reading of this part of the story sees Gollum softening, and the Smeagol part of his dual personality coming to the fore. All of which changed when Frodo and Sam were captured by Faramir. Gollum tracks them to the Forbidden Pool just outside the Ithilien Rangers' hideout, which would normally mean death, but Faramir opts to seek Frodo's counsel first. Frodo persuades Faramir to spare Gollum's life and just capture him instead. Then, after questioning Gollum, Faramir releases Frodo, Sam and Gollum, sensing their greater mission. Faramir, great man that he is, does the right thing, regardless of what his troops think he should do. Frodo also does the right thing. Gollum had no interest in betraying Faramir's troops, but Gollum just sees Frodo come down and greet him, and then lead him to Faramir's troops to be captured. This is one of those wonderfully multi-layered moments in Tolkien's work. Everyone here does as they should, and yet here lie the seeds of all that is to come. Gollum, understandably, feels betrayed, which leads to him betraying Frodo and Sam later. But for Faramir and Frodo's mercy here, Gollum wouldn't have survived to the end, and the ring wouldn't have been destroyed. So, good acts ultimately led to a good outcome. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For Gollum, this was a betrayal. He, Smeagol, had promised to serve Frodo in implicit exchange for Frodo not binding Gollum or hurting him, and Frodo had just turned him over to Faramir's troops, who were not gentle, all of which switches Smeagol back into Gollum mode, and at this point he hatches his plan to lead the hobbits into Shelob's lair and leave them to Shelob. His hope was that Shelob would eat Frodo and leave the ring, the precious which Gollum could then take, which goes to plan until the moment where the Phial of Galadriel and Sting and Sam's bravery all come to the fore. But still, Gollum will not give up. He is now driven, more than ever if that is possible, with a need to get the ring. His fear of Sauron is now overtaken by a fear that Frodo will actually destroy the ring itself. He tracks the two hobbits again, this time all the way to Mount Doom itself, and finally launches his attack, leaping on them from above. We're told that Frodo himself prevailed, with a fury driven by the desire to stop someone taking the ring from him by force. Gollum himself was by this point emaciated, weak and pitiful. It's clear that he had neither eaten nor even drunk any water, as his focus had been so tightly on the ring. And Sam sees a vision of the two of them at this point, with Gollum appearing as a crouching shape, scarcely more than the shadow of a living thing, a creature now wholly ruined and defeated, yet filled with a hideous lust and rage. That's who Gollum is at this point in the story. Sam takes over, releasing Frodo to head up to the cracks of doom, but Sam feels pity for Gollum. It's perhaps instructive that until this point Sam had been pretty distrustful of Gollum, but now, having been a ring-bearer himself for a time, he feels pity, the same pity that Bilbo and Frodo before him felt, and he lets Gollum go. This pity one after the other by three hobbit ring-bearers who perhaps felt deep down that, but for the grace of Aru, they might too have ended up like that, frees Gollum to launch his last frantic attempt to get the ring. We know what happens next. Frodo turns at the cracks of doom, his resolve failing at the last, putting on the ring, and Gollum pounces. He bites off Frodo's finger, finally getting back his precious. He had finally reclaimed the thing he loved the most. There are books worth of analyses about how and why Gollum fell into the cracks of doom, having reclaimed the ring. cursed by Frodo, all part of Eru Iluvatar's ineffable plan, and so on. They are all perhaps true in their own way, but there is one thing that cannot be denied. The simplest, most straightforward answer from Gollum's perspective was that when Gollum reclaimed the ring, he was so consumed by it, so overwhelmed by his possession of that which possessed him, that nothing else mattered to him. He danced with delight, not even aware of his surroundings, and fell. Gollum is one of the most astonishing characters in all literature. Everything about him makes our skin crawl, but we are invited to pity him. Ultimately, his victory is also his doom, and his doom is the saving of all of Middle-earth. Gollum shows us what the ring can do to someone. For most of the story, he is openly trying to murder our heroes, but we're never invited to hate him for it. More than Frodo or Aragorn or Gandalf, Gollum is the thematic heart of this story. Tolkien would ask us, how do we respond to Gollum? Do we despise him, or can we find some pity in our hearts? For it is the pity of Bilbo, Frodo and Sam that ultimately drives the story to its conclusion. If you'd like more videos about The Lord of the Rings, then click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, the best way to do that is by clicking the link to Patreon on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.